Hello and welcome to Getting Started with Alight Motion. In this video, you'll see just how easy it is to make impressive, eye-catching animations on your phone. We'll show you how to animate the basic layer types and how to use effects and shadows to add polish to your projects. By the end of the tutorial, you'll be able to recreate everything you see here in this example nature video. You'll see that when it comes to working with layers in Alight Motion, there are 3 simple steps: add, adjust, and animate. For example, we'll add the snowflake, adjust its color and timing, and animate it with keyframes. And then we'll simply repeat the process for the other elements in the video. So here we go. Start a new project by tapping the New Project button. Go ahead and give your project a super cool name. Don't worry, you can always change it later. Alight Motion supports a variety of aspect ratios, resolutions, and frame rates. For this project, we want to use the 4:5 aspect ratio. Why? It's great for general social content, especially Instagram posts. Next, set the resolution to 1080p and the frame rate to 30 frames per second. Check that the background color is light gray and tap Create Project. This is the editing screen. Let's take a quick tour of the main parts. The navigation bar is at the top, and that's where you can change the project title, adjust settings, and share your project. Then you have the preview of your project. Below the preview, you'll find the control bar, and below that is the timeline, which includes the playhead indicating the current preview and edit time. The playhead is currently at 0 seconds, 0 frames, because the project is empty. Finally, at the bottom of the screen is the Add Layer button, which opens the Add Layer panel. From this panel, you can add a variety of layers to your project. The tabs provide access to shapes, media, audio, objects such as cameras, and elements. And you can also directly add freehand drawings, vector drawings, and text layers. To close the Add Layer panel, just tap anywhere outside of it. Before you start working on the project, take note of the undo and redo buttons. They'll come in handy in case you make a mistake. Let's add our snowflake. This is one of the built-in shapes in Alight Motion, so just tap the Add Layer button and the Add Layer panel will open with the Shapes tab already selected. Just swipe right and tap the snowflake to add it to the project timeline. Newly added layers are automatically selected, but let's take a quick look at how to select and deselect layers. To deselect a layer, tap in the preview or on an empty part of the timeline. To select a layer, tap it or its thumbnail on the timeline, or tap the layer in the preview. You can also swipe your finger across the preview until the layer you want is highlighted in red, then lift your finger to select it. When the snowflake layer is selected, it'll have a white outline. To move a selected layer, swipe anywhere on the preview. Some shapes in the Shapes browser, like this snowflake, are actually vector drawings. While they're selected, you can tap Edit Points to move or animate each point individually. Some shapes have handles you can drag to intelligently control their features. You can also adjust them in the Edit Shape panel. Let's adjust the snowflake by changing the color, the scale, and the layer timing and duration. First, let's change the color. Make sure the snowflake layer is selected, then tap Color and Fill. You can change the color by selecting it from the palette, picking it from the screen with the eyedropper, or using one of the color pickers, whatever works for you. Adjust the snowflake scale by tapping the layer to select it and then by tapping on Move and Transform. This panel is where you can adjust or animate the scale of a layer, as well as its position, pivot, rotation, and skew. Go ahead and tap on the Scale button, then swipe on the slider to make the snowflake roughly the size shown on screen. In the example project we're creating, the snowflake layer starts at the half-second mark and ends at the 3-second mark. So here's how to do that. We can control the time when the snowflake appears by moving the layer on the timeline. One way to do this is to long press the layer in the timeline and drag it. We want it to appear a half second after the start of the animation, so drag the layer to the 15 frames mark. Because we gave the project a frame rate of 30 frames per second, 15 frames are exactly half a second. A layer disappears when it ends on the timeline. Adjust this by dragging the handle at the right-hand end of the layer that appears when the layer is selected. Let's make the layer end at the 3-second mark, giving it a total duration of 2.5 seconds. So now our snowflake is the right size and color, it appears at the right time, and it has the right duration. So far, so good. Now that you've made the basic adjustments to the snowflake, it's time to animate. Here's what the end result will look like. See how the snowflake rotates as it grows from a point and then slides up to make room for the text. But before we dive into how to do this, here's a quick overview of animating with keyframes. Keyframes are the most important concept in animating with Alight Motion. Keyframes appear as white diamonds on layers in the timeline. In traditional animation, animators draw the most important, or the key, frames of an animation and then draw each transitional frame by hand. This process is called tweening, and luckily, Alight Motion does it automatically. Just tell Alight Motion what a layer should be doing at important or key points in time, and it will calculate and generate the intermediate frames. Let's see this in action as we work with the rotation, scale, and position animations one at a time. First, let's take care of the rotation animation. Select the snowflake layer, tap Move and Transform, and then tap the rotation icon. Scroll the timeline so the playhead is at the 15 frames mark, which is the first frame of the layer, and then tap the Add Keyframe button. A white diamond will appear on the layer at the current time, and just like that, you've added a keyframe. This one tells Alight Motion to give the snowflake layer a rotation value of 0 degrees at the 15 frames mark. Now scroll to the 1 second mark where we want the rotation to end and set the value to 180 degrees. At this point, you've probably noticed a few things. First, a new keyframe has appeared on the timeline. That's because Alight Motion automatically adds a new keyframe anytime you change a property, for example, rotation, as long as that property already has at least one keyframe on the timeline. And second, you'll see that the keyframe is highlighted in green, which means it's selected and you can adjust its values. Scrolling the timeline so the playhead is at the same time as a keyframe will select the keyframe, causing it to be highlighted in green. Let's take a look at your animation so far. Scroll to the beginning of the timeline, then tap the play button. Look at that spin. Another way to quickly get to the beginning or the end of the timeline or selected layer is by using the skip buttons. With these buttons, you can also jump to the nearest keyframe or to a bookmark on the timeline. If you want to add or remove a bookmark, simply tap the top of the playhead. Now that you've made the snowflake spin, it's time to make it grow. Scroll to the 1 second mark on the timeline, then open Move and Transform and tap the scale icon. You'll notice that the rotation keyframes on the layer become faint as we work on a different property. That's because each property has its own keyframe or set of keyframes, which means a layer can have lots of different animations happening at once. So the goal is to animate the snowflake so it grows from a tiny point to its current size. And the easiest way to do this is by adding the final scale keyframe first, at the 1 second mark. Then scroll back to the 15 frames mark and swipe the scale spinner to 0. If you see 2 spinners instead of 1, it means you're resizing horizontally and vertically separately. In that case, just tap this link icon to switch so you're resizing them together. You now have 2 scale keyframes on the layer in addition to the rotation keyframes. So when you play back the animation, you'll see the snowflake simultaneously growing and spinning. Cool, right? Now it's time to make the snowflake move upward to create room for the text. To do this, tap on the position icon. You can do 2 things with the position property: edit the position of the layer or edit its pivot point. In case you accidentally switch to pivot point editing mode, just tap on the position icon again. Scroll the timeline to the 1 second mark and add a keyframe for the start of the position animation. Then move to the 2 second mark and swipe the control pad upward to move the layer up. The exact value doesn't matter, as you can adjust it when you add the text later. There should now be a second position keyframe on the timeline. This is a good time to point out that when you're creating or editing position animations in Move and Transform, you need to move the layer with the control pad rather than by swiping in the preview. Here's why. Moving a layer with the control pad adds new keyframes or modifies existing keyframes if they're highlighted, while moving a layer by swiping in the preview moves all of the position keyframes at once. So if you don't see two position keyframes in a line when the snowflake layer is selected, it's probably because you moved the layer with the preview. In this case, simply put that undo button to good use and try again using the control pad. With the position keyframe set, you've added all the keyframes needed to animate your snowflake. And now we can have some fun playing around with the motion to make it more natural. Take a second to play your whole project back. Notice how the motion looks a bit jerky? In real life, objects tend to change velocity gradually, continuously speeding up and slowing down rather than moving at a constant rate. In animation, this kind of natural, gradual change of speed is called easing, and it's easy to apply it to any keyframe animation in Alight Motion. Let's start with the rotation animation. With the snowflake layer selected, tap Move and Transform and then the rotation icon. From there, tap the Easing button. In the Easing panel, you'll see a green line with two handles. If you don't see the line, make sure to scroll the timeline so the playhead is between the two rotation keyframes. You can select the easing type on the right side of the panel. For this project, leave it set to the option at the top. This is called an easing curve, and it controls the progression of an animation between two keyframes of the same property. Each pair of adjacent keyframes has a separate curve. The horizontal axis represents the time between the two keyframes, and the vertical axis represents the amount of progress between the two keyframe values. The dotted vertical line helps you visualize the current playhead position relative to the surrounding keyframes. A straight line indicates linear easing, a constant rate of change between two keyframes. But you want the snowflake layer to move smoothly by starting slow, speeding up, and then slowing down again at the end of the animation. To create this natural motion, manually drag the handles or select the ready-made ease in, ease out curve. In easing curves, more vertical slopes indicate that the animation will progress more quickly, and more horizontal slopes more slowly. As you see, the curve we've created starts horizontal, then becomes vertical, and then horizontal again as it goes towards the right. This means the layer will start moving slowly, speed up, and then gradually slow down and come to rest. The effect of the changes to the curve can be seen in the preview in real time. Go ahead and set the easing for all the animations. In the Move and Transform panel, tap Position, move the playhead between the two keyframes, tap Easing, and then set the curve to ease in and ease out of the animation. Then do the same for the scale keyframes. When you play the animation back, see how much smoother and more natural it now looks? You may want to make some more small adjustments later, but your snowflake is basically finished. Let's move on to adding, adjusting, and animating text. The example project we're creating contains two text layers, Understanding and Nature. Let's start by adding the Nature text layer. Scroll to the 1 second 5 frames mark. Making sure you don't have any layer selected, tap the Add Layer button, then tap Text to add an empty text layer. Go ahead and type Nature in the text box. Then you can change the font by tapping the current font name, then View All Fonts. Make sure none of the categories in the side menu are selected. Use the search button to find Barlow, then select Barlow Bold. To finish, set the font size so it fits well on the screen, set the alignment to center, and then set the color to white. Tap the check mark to finish editing. Let's now animate our nature text layer. This layer slides in from off screen and also fades in over time. Let's start with a sliding animation, which should last 1 second. So go to the 2 seconds 5 frames mark, tap Move and Transform, and add a position keyframe. Next, scroll to the 1 second 5 frames mark and swipe on the control pad to move the layer off screen to the right. Remember that swiping on the control pad adds a keyframe. There's also snapping to ensure you're moving perfectly horizontally. You'll see a line appear and feel a bump. Now we want to smooth out the animation with easing, just like we did with the snowflake layer. With the playhead between the 2 position keyframes, tap the easing button and choose the 3rd Bezier curve. This will make the animation start quickly, then smoothly come to a stop. The next step is to add our fade-in animation. With the layer selected, tap Blending and Opacity. Scroll to the 1 minute 25 frames mark and then tap the Add Keyframe button. Here we want the text layer to be fully opaque. Then scroll to the 1 minute 5 frames mark, the first frame of the layer and drag the slider left until the opacity is 0 and the layer completely disappears. Our nature text layer animations are done. We can now move on to the animation on the understanding layer, which is basically the same as the nature layer. The only difference is that they're moving in opposite directions. So after adding the layer, we'll save time by copying the style of the layer we already animated. We'll add the understanding layer at the same time as the nature layer. In the text box that appears, type understanding. Set the alignment to center, change the font to satisfy regular, make it so it fits well on the screen, and tap the check mark to finish editing. Let's scroll ahead until we see both text layers, which will help us edit more easily. Leaving the understanding layer gray for now will also help. So here's how to copy the animations from the nature layer to the understanding layer. First, tap the nature layer to select it. Then tap the edit menu button, and then copy layer. Now select the understanding layer. Go back to the edit menu and tap the arrow next to paste style. We see 6 icons appear on the screen, one for each panel in the add layer panel. We only want to copy the blending and opacity and the move and transform layer styles, including their animations, so we turn the rest off and press paste. You can see that the understanding layer now has the same position and animations as the nature layer. Time for some final adjustments. Let's select each text layer and swipe on the preview so they're centered together vertically on the screen. Remember that swiping on the preview lets you move the layer's entire position animation at once, without making new keyframes. When we tap play, we see that both layers still move horizontally. Now we can go ahead and change the color of the understanding layer. Select the layer, tap on color and fill, and change the color to white. The last thing left to change is the direction in which the understanding layer is moving. With the layer selected, tap on Move and Transform and use the skip buttons to quickly move to the first position keyframe. This keyframe is highlighted in green, which means that if we swipe on the control pad, we'll be editing its value. Swiping left, we see the line showing the layer's movement. We can't see the layer itself because we've made it invisible at the current time. Pressing play, we see one layer coming in from the left and one from the right, which is perfect. We just need to extend the layers to the end of the project. Let's take a bit of time to make some minor adjustments to our layers. Remember to edit on the control pad if you want to adjust or add an animation, or on the preview to adjust both a layer and its animation together. For example, our project might look better if the text layers were offset horizontally instead of perfectly centered when they finish. We can do this by swiping on the preview directly to move the layer and its animation together. You can also adjust the position of a layer at a particular time. In our version, the snowflake looks a bit too high up at the end. So in Move and Transform, we can scroll to the correct keyframe and then swipe down on the control pad to move the snowflake lower. Feel free to pause this tutorial and keep adjusting until you're happy with the results. Now it's time to add the background. Tap the Add Layer button, select Image and Video, and choose the image or video you want to use for the background layer. For example, this winter scene video works nicely, but go ahead and use whatever video you like. You may need to trim the video to match the length of the project. You might have noticed a problem at this point. The background is covering up the other layers. To fix that, we need to change the order of the layers. On the right side of the timeline, there's a grip for each layer. Note that this grip is separate from the layer itself and is always pinned to the right side of the timeline view. Long press the grip for the background layer for a short moment, then continue pressing as you drag it downward to move the layer to the bottom of the timeline. In general, layers toward the bottom appear in the back, while layers toward the top appear in the front, although this ordering can be overwritten when working with the Z-axis. We can also bring the snowflake layer in front of the text layers. See how nicely everything's coming together? Our animation is basically finished, but there are lots of small things we can do to make our project really pop. For example, adding a slight shadow can make our shape and text layers stand out more. Tap the snowflake layer to select it, and then tap on Border and Shadow. Tap the Shadow tab and then turn on Shadow. Set the values as you like, or use the same values now shown on the screen. We can also add shadows to the text layers. And if we want our audience to focus on the center of the screen as the text comes in, lens blur is a great effect for this. It's only available to members, but everyone can try it. With the video layer selected, tap Effects, then Add Effect to open the Effects browser. You'll see that Alight Motion has lots to choose from. Take a second if you want to pause this tutorial and check out what's available. Now, to apply the effect, type Lens Blur in the search bar and then select it, then tap Standard Settings. If you don't have an Alight Motion membership, just tap Try It First when given the option. We'll add a keyframe at the 15 frames mark and another at the 1 second mark. Here are the values we're using for each keyframe, but don't be afraid to adjust them to make your project unique. The last thing we need to do is add some music to our project. To add an audio clip, tap on the Add Layer button, then choose Audio. You'll see some audio files from your device, and you can tap the View All button if you'd like to see more. Feel free to add your own choice of music to this project. You can also find the download link for the track we're using in the description below. If you don't see the audio file you want to use, make sure it's in a folder that can be accessed by Alight Motion, or add it to the music app on your device. Please note that audio files with copyright protection or those provided by a streaming service may not be accessible to Alight Motion. If you don't see any audio files at all, exit the project and make sure that demo mode is turned off. Also, in the settings on your device, make sure that Alight Motion can access your media files. Once you've added the audio, your project is ready. Go ahead and play it back to see what you've created. Not bad, right? Now you can export it as a video, an animated GIF, or a sequence of images. From there, you can save it to your device or share it for the world to see. If you don't have an Alight Motion membership, you'll just need to remove lens blur from the background layer before exporting. If you do share your project, please use the hashtag #AMGettingStarted because we'd love to see it. So now you know the basics of adding images, shapes, and text as layers. You know how to animate them using keyframes and easing, and how to add effects for polish. It's a great start. As you continue your editing journey, maybe take some time to familiarize yourself with the Home and Tutorial tabs in Alight Motion. The Home tab is where you'll find news and updates about Alight Motion straight from the source. And the Tutorial tab contains in-depth tutorial videos on various topics, plus essential tips and sample projects to download and follow. You'll also find a link to our user guide, an ever-growing reference on the Alight Motion features and interface. Want to learn more about Alight Motion? Head over to our YouTube channel. Be sure to like and subscribe to stay in the loop about future tutorials. And don't forget to tell us what you think of this one in the comments section below. And remember to show us your projects by sharing them with the hashtag #AMGettingStarted.